Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are located, our viewers. It's a pleasure to have you join us as we launch our Health Cities series with an exciting discussion on Nairobi's infrastructure, which will culminate with the launch of the Nairobi Non-Motorized Transport Policy, the popular version. We will be sharing a link to this policy on the chat area as we proceed, and you will also be receiving this link in a follow-up email tomorrow. Please look out for that. Before we proceed, we would like you to know that this webinar will be recorded and can be accessed on our YouTube page, as well as on our webinar under videos in the coming week. Some features have been disabled, these being audio and video sharing, as well as screen share. You're welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. The moderator will direct your questions to the panel towards the end of the session. For more engaging programs, please subscribe to our mailing list by visiting our Contact Us page on our website, globalcenters.columbia.edu/Nairobi. I would now like to hand over to our director, Dr. Murugi Dirango, to make the welcome remarks. Welcome, Dr. Dirango.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience, and welcome. As Pauline has said, my name is Murugi Dirango, and I serve as the director of Columbia Global Centers Nairobi. CGC Nairobi is one of 9 centers across the globe established by Columbia University to create opportunities for shared learning and to deepen the nature of global dialogue. CGC Nairobi is pleased to partner with the Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations and the Center for Sustainable Development at the Earth Institute, Columbia University, in a 2-part series that takes a hard look at Kenya's urban transportation infrastructure in an age of climate change. In the course of 2 consecutive discussions with professionals, citizen activists, and decision makers, our speakers will ask if the urban transportation infrastructure being built in Kenya's cities is meeting the expectation of the 21st century, where concerns about safe, healthy cities, air pollution, climate change, and redressing equity and injustices are pressing. The first session will discuss the state of non-motorized transport that like walking and cycling for mobility in Kenya, and we launch the popular version of Nairobi County's non-motorized policy. I would now like to introduce the moderator for this event, Henry Ochieng. Henry Ochieng is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Alliance of Resident Association, otherwise known as KARA, the apex body representing the voice and proactive action of resident associations on better access to public service delivery and taxpayers' rights in Kenya. He has extensive experience and skills in policy advocacy and influencing, promoting effective social accountability strategies, community mobilization and capacity building, networking and partnerships, as well as project psycho-management, among others. Henry has designed and successfully overseen the implementation of various programs on urban transportation and planning, with the most recent being facilitating the development of a non-motorized transport policy for Nairobi, supported by the UN Environment. He also led the engagement between the Center for Sustainable Urban Development on the Digital Matatu project, and especially the launch of transit data and map for Nairobi City. He was a member of the Transport and Urban Decongestion Committee that was set up by the governor of Nairobi to carry out a study of major transportation challenges facing Nairobi, develop recommendations that will address current and projected traffic congestion, access delays, and non-motorized transport infrastructure, and develop a transport policy for the city. Henry has a master's in strategic management from the University of Nairobi. Please join me in welcoming Henry to lead the discussion. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much, Murugi, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, participants from wherever you are. I want to thank Pauline and Murugi for those introductory remarks and welcome all of you to this particular session. Thank you for creating time to be with us, and we look forward to a very, very exciting and productive discussion. Pauline and Murugi have given some basic introduction about why we are here today and what we are going to talk about. So I'll just mention briefly, maybe add briefly, and then we can go straight into our presentation. So let me just quote a small caption here that was captured in 2006 in a sessional paper from the Ministry of Roads and Public Works, which noted that despite its importance, appreciation for non-motorized transport is not in evidence, and there is a lack of respect and accommodation for NMT by motorists and disregard by planners. There's a distortion in the allocation of resources against transportation demands, with a large portion of resources being allocated to motorized transport as compared to NMT. Our first session is going to focus mainly on NMT infrastructure in Kenya, and we're going to ask ourselves a number of questions because, as I've mentioned in that particular quote, there's a general feeling that NMT is not given the priority that it deserves. While most of us are actually using NMT to move from point A to point B, if you look at that in regard to even the level of investment by government, there's a disconnect, and priority is often given to motorist or motorized transport as opposed to NMT. So the question we are asking today in this particular forum is, have we experienced any changes over time? And what progress has there been? And and we need to do more to ensure that we are giving a little bit more focus on issues of NMT, not just in Nairobi, but in other cities in Kenya, and of course, across the world. So we put together this particular session to look at those issues very critically and bring out what could be the progress, what could be the challenges, what could be the projection in terms of the planning. What are we planning to do in order to address some of the challenges that we are facing? And then what kind of role can each of us play in our specific roles, in our specific station, to ensure that we are actively involved and we're actively pushing for more recognition and more investment on NMT mode of transportation. So we put together a panel of presenters who are going to speak to us on different topics, but of course within the context of NMT. So we are going to listen to them, and then thereafter we are able to engage. What we request is that if you have any question, or if you have any comment or any kind of reaction, you can post that on the chat box, you can share with us, and then we'll be able now, after the presentation, to get the presenters to respond. We have 4 presenters. Number 1 is Constant Cape, who's going to talk to us about NMT pilot efforts in Nairobi and from a user's perspective. So we all know that Constant Cape is very active on issues of NMT, and I'm going to briefly tell you about him when we step forward to present. We're also going to have a presentation on progress on the streets design manual for urban areas and the Kisumu Mombasa NMT initiative. And this will be tackled by Chris Scott from ITDP. We're also going to listen to Kali Koinange on why NMT policy is important and NMT best practices from other countries. And Kali has worked with many countries on issues of NMT, so she'll share with us briefly on that. Lastly, we'll hear from our brother Martin Eshiwani from the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, Director of Roads and Transport. And Martin will share with us on NMT policy, what the implementation plan are, and the progress that have been made so far. We know that the implementers of this particular policy are definitely from government, and right now NMS is squarely concerned with the issues of NMT. So Martin will share with us on what they're doing, what they're planning to do, and how they're addressing the challenges that might be arising. Lastly, we are going to have Jackie Klopp just to make some summary remarks. And Jackie is a partner in this initiative. We've worked with Jackie for a very long time on a number of positive initiatives. So she'll make brief remarks and then we are able to close that session. We expect that we are going to conclude this session by the launch of the NMT policy popular version, which was developed through an initiative of CARA, CSUD, and SIPA, which we are going to talk about when we come to the launch. So Martin Eshiwane, and I've persuaded him to be with us up to that particular point, will help us to formally launch that particular popular policy. So that is the flow of events we are going to have this afternoon. And there's a program on your screen, and that's what is going to guide our discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, without taking much time, allow me now to go straight to the presentations. And this is Christopher Cost from ITDP. I hope I'm pronouncing the names properly.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hi,
so
yeah.
Christopher is from ITDP. Just a minute, Christopher. I just need to introduce you. And is a full-time staff at ITDP and member since 2008, and has been involved as a consultant since 2004, focusing on transport projects in Africa and India. In Cape Town, Accra, and Johannesburg, he assessed the impacts of proposed BRT system on greenhouse gas emissions. More recently, Chris has been involved in projects in the Indian states of Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Jharkhand, covering areas such as bus rapid transport, street design, parking management, and transit-oriented development. Chris has been involved in a number of TOD projects, including the local area plan for Ahmedabad's Central Business District, and updated TOD policy for BRT corridors in Pimpri, Chinchwad, TOD planning efforts for Chennai's metro and suburban rail networks, and TOD elements in Ashik's new development plan. Chris now leads ITDP initiative in Kenya, Uganda, and other African countries. Before then, he worked for the Transportation and Land Use Coalition, now Transform, in Auckland, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, also in Auckland, the City of Berkeley's Planning Department, Mayor Mohades Associates, Los Angeles, and Daily Consult in Accra. Chris received his bachelor's and master's degree in environmental policy from the Earth System program at Stanford University. So Chris is going to talk to us about progress on the streets design manual for urban areas, and of course, share with us the experience of Kisumu, Mombasa, NMT initiatives, which they're actively involved in. So Chris, please speak to us.
Okay, great. So thanks, Henry, and it's great to be here with everyone. I'll talk about the street design manual for urban areas in Kenya, as Henry mentioned, and then I'll also give, as I'm talking about that, I'll give some examples from Kisumu, from Mombasa, to show how those cities have already been implementing a lot of the principles that are there in the manual. So I'm sorry, let me share the slides, just one sec. Great. All right. So yeah, and the theme for this whole discussion is how do we move from urban highways to complete streets? And that's really been our starting point in Kenya, because so far the way that we've been designing streets in our cities, we're just designing them like rural highways, and we're ignoring the fact that on these urban streets, there are pedestrians, there are cyclists, there are public transport users, and they all need to be accommodated. So ITDP is a global not-for-profit NGO. You can see the cities where we're active in the Africa region. I'm based here in Nairobi. So to start out, it's always good to go back to the figures. You know, in our Kenyan cities, people are predominantly dependent on walking and public transport. And in the smaller cities, cycling also has a sizable mode share. And we only have a few of the trips by car. In Mombasa, it's as low as 3%. In Nairobi, it's only 13% still. So that's how people are traveling. And when you look at it by gender, that's also a dramatic difference too. So these are some numbers from the household survey that we did in Kisumu. And you can see that there are a lot of women walking and fewer women who have access to private vehicles. So we really need to think about who we're serving with these road projects and if they're accommodating all users. So far, this is the focus. We're implementing these high carbon, high cost projects in all of our cities, trying to build a lot of flyovers, trying to build more lanes for cars. But the problem is they're filling up with traffic. They only lead to short-term benefits. They attract more vehicles. They compete with public transport, and really undermining a lot of the sustainability and equity goals that Kenya has as a country. We also have results like this. This kind of scene is what really motivated us to create the street design manual. The just absolute lack of facilities. And it's very hard to move around if you have children. It's hard for people with disabilities. We've been trying to build NMT facilities, but then this is the result that we're often getting. The designs just don't make sense, and we have to stop signing off on things like this, have to stop approving work like this, and ensure that we follow a much better standard and get good results from these investments that we're making. Here you can see how many lanes were developed for cars, but this is the way that we're maintaining the cycle track. The carriageway seems to have a much better design and level of maintenance and upkeep. And there's no footpath here, except for these drain covers, if you want to call that a footpath, but I wouldn't. So this is really showing why we need design standards. We have to stop wasting money on really bad infrastructure like this and start designing streets that people can use. It's basic, but we have to shift from this, putting the car first and foremost to really designing for all users. And there's a difference between designing a highway plus footpaths and an urban street, right? This is typically the approach. We go for high speeds. We try to get the pedestrians out of the way. They should go up on footbridges. They should go into subways, anywhere but, where they would make the cars stop. And we have to move away from that, really start designing urban streets. Urban streets can carry a lot of people. They can have, some of our streets need to carry more vehicles. We can do that, but we can do that while accommodating pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport users. And that's what we try to do in the street design manual. It's being done in other countries, so we're waiting for it to be done in Kenya. In Dar es Salaam, you can see the wide walkways, the cycle tracks, the priority for BRT. How can we develop corridors like this in Kenya as well that prioritize the majority of road users, and then we give some space to the cars, which only account for 13% of the trips in Nairobi. So this is the street design manual. It's in draft form. We've been developing it in partnership with the Transport Ministry, and it's been supported by the World Bank through the Global Road Safety Partnership, as well as International Climate Initiative. And we've had a really nice consultation process so far. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. The road agencies, Kenha, Kura, have weighed in. Also, county governments have participated in a lot of these sessions. And more recently, we've been able to reach out to some of the professional associations, and they've given a lot of good input. And the latest session was with KEPSA in late November. So the manual has a few different sections. It talks about the principles that we need to incorporate. It talks about how to think about transport networks. You have different layers of networks in the city for public transport, for cycling, for pedestrians and motor vehicles. And then it goes into the specific design standards for street elements. And then it gives some templates for street cross sections and intersections. And then finally, it talks about the design process. Because a lot of the issue in design today is that we don't have an inclusive design process. We don't involve different types of stakeholders. We don't make designs public. So people only find out about things when the project's already built. So we have to change not only the designs, but also how we prepare them, okay? And so I wanted to highlight a few of the principles. We won't have time to go through all of them, but a few of the key ones include designing for safety. So the idea that as speeds increase, the risk of a crash being fatal goes up significantly. And so we have to keep speeds much lower. You know, in Kenya, by law, speeds are supposed to be 50 kilometers or below by urban areas. But that's not how we're designing our streets. We're designing our urban streets for much higher speeds, and that has to change. We need to start designing for the actual operating speed and not for higher speeds than the speed limit. And wherever possible, keeping speeds to 30 or below, definitely in school areas and any areas that have heavy pedestrian volumes. We also need to think about efficiency. You know, the current approach of trying to build our way out of our traffic jams by building flyovers and elevated highways is a fool's errand. It's not going to solve the problem. We have to start dedicating space for public transport, especially in the form of BRT, if we want to solve the problem. And we have to be clear on our priorities. So the design manual lays out a clear set of priorities, because street design is all about trade-offs. You know, oftentimes you don't have enough width to do everything that you'd like to. So we have to choose whom we're going to prioritize. And so having this there really emphasizes the way that we need to make those trade-offs when we can't incorporate all the elements. So after those initial sections, the manual gives the specific design standards. Here's an example, you know, the basic idea of following the zoning system when you're developing footpaths, so that you have at least 2 meters of clear space for walking. You know, that wasn't achieved on Outer Ring Road. You know, even though we had about, you know, 8 or 9 lanes for cars, we couldn't manage to get the 2 meters for pedestrians. So we really have to make sure that we start getting enough width for people to walk. And then all the furniture and other elements need to be concentrated into one zone so that they don't obstruct pedestrian movement. And then it also talks about universal access. So this has been a big challenge, and even in some of the footpaths that have been built in Nairobi, even this year, don't have universal access still. And I don't think there's any excuse for that. You know, we have to figure out how to design ramps, how to do them at an appropriate slope, and make sure that everyone can access our streets. So that's covered in the manual. There are some cities that are really taking a lead. I think, you know, local governments in Kenya are really doing amazing work. So Mombasa had the red carpet for pedestrians project, where a lot of streets in the CBD were upgraded. A lot of parking spots were removed and turned over for pedestrians. And it's looking really nice. Kisumu has also taken action with support through the Kenya Urban Sport Program. This is one of the stretches on Jomo Kenyatta, and you know, you can see the kind of transformation that they were able to achieve. You know, it's not just a 1.5 meter footpath like we usually provide. It's not even 2 meters. It's much wider. And so it's really catering to the volumes there, and you can see the street furniture. You know, it's really thinking about streets as a public space, you know, not just as an artery for movement. So then I wanted to talk about crossings because this has been a big issue in Kenya. In all of our cities, we keep building these bridges. You know, if people say it's not safe to cross, okay, build a bridge. These bridges are not pedestrian infrastructure. They're infrastructure for cars. They're designed to speed up cars. They're not to help pedestrians. If you wanted to help pedestrians, you'd do an at-grade crossing. And they're often dangerous. So a lot of people avoid them because they're afraid of being mugged. And even if you provide ramps, they're still not easy for someone with a disability to use, and they obstruct the walkways. And you know, you might just think it's a fluke, you know, oh, maybe this was just a bad design. But then if you look in case after case in Nairobi and Mombasa and elsewhere, these bridges keep blocking the walkways. And so people have to walk in the cycle track, like what's happening here on Outer Ring Road. They have to walk in the carriageway on Thika Highway. And so this is not the way to design our streets. You know, we need to start designing safe crossings. Here's how that can be done. This is one of the graphics from the manual. Having tabletop crossings raised to the level of footpath. The ramp needs to be steep enough to actually slow down the vehicles. And it needs to have good finishing so that there's no level difference. And we have good examples now. You know, Kisumu did some really nice tabletops as part of the Kisumu Triangle project. And there's really nice finishing. You know, you can see the way that the tabletop was matched up to the level of the walkway. They really took time to get this right. And I don't see why we can't do this in Nairobi. You know, Kura has done a couple of them. So this is one on Gong Road, but the plan is to demolish this and replace it with a footbridge, right? So that again doesn't make sense. Like this is a really nice example. It's slowing down the vehicles. You know, people have started congregating at this crossing there, you know, instead of just crossing everywhere. So why not build more of these? You know, why not really, you know, prioritize pedestrians, really act in the spirit of the NMT policy and you know, and provide good crossings. So then we get to cycle tracks, and the manual talks about the clear guidelines that you need to have sufficient width, again, at least 2 meters. We need to start paving these cycle tracks in a smooth material, not paver blocks. And the footpaths next to them need to be wide enough so that pedestrians don't have to walk in the cycle track. We have good examples again in Nairobi. You know, phase 2 of Gong Road had these pretty decent cycle tracks. The footpath though is a bit narrow. So if you go there in the evening, then people walk on the cycle track because the footpath can't carry the volumes. But this is a much better case, and this is what we should stop replicating. You know, we need to design, you know, well with the smooth material, and yeah, and make these cycle tracks easy to use. You know, Kisumu tried to develop the cycle track, but you know, after pressure from one agency that shall remain unnamed, they were forced to remove the cycle track and put the barricades on the footpath. And you know the reason that this was so innovative was because it was using the existing carriageway space, and so they were able to do this at a pretty low cost and do it easily. And the design can be adjusted depending on you know, what you learn from this initial phase, and it can be deployed on a lot of these streets where we have oversized carriageways. And, you know, and we need to devote some space to cycling. You know, we don't require a lot of reconstruction. You know, you can see here the pavement was pretty good, so you could maintain that existing pavement. But we have to find out ways to make them work. You know, I think if there are design issues, like we should have solved them and not taken them off of off completely. So you know, we were heartened to hear recently that the governor of Kisumu is looking to reinstate the cycle track, and we hope it'll be up and functioning very soon. So the final thing I wanted to highlight is this issue of trees, because for those of us who walk and cycle in Nairobi, we've been seeing this transformation over time where we're losing the tree canopy at a very rapid rate. And what's crazy is that it's happening unnecessarily. So here we've traced out the construction envelope of Gong Road. And you can see that almost all these trees that were cut were outside of the area that was used for the road. And so this cutting was actually completely unnecessary. And so we have to be careful and creative enough to actually map out these trees and not cut them as the first step in every project. We're seeing this happen, you know, on one street after another. So this is Lakoni Road. You know, this is near residential areas. Like I was out here the other day, there were kids who were coming out and they were looking at the birds in these trees. They were really fascinated, and we're planning to cut them all down because we can't figure out a way to fit the road design in the available space, which is actually quite generous. So let's figure out how to be more creative about these designs. You know, Kenyatta Avenue, all 4 rows of trees are going to be cut by Kura unless we do something about it. And so this really has to be part of our approach to promoting NMT. You know, we have to stop cutting these trees. It's not enough to just say, okay, I'm going to cut all these and I'm going to plant 10 times as many trees somewhere outside the city. Like, we have to maintain these mature trees where they are, where they'll actually provide benefit to people who are walking and cycling in the city. And it can be done, like Kisumu did it in the Triangle Project. You know, they modified the design, like they had to work around the trees. They had to think about their construction methodology so that they could get their equipment in here and do this work without cutting the trees. But it was possible, and you can see the result was so beautiful, and people are able to enjoy this street, and it's, you know, it's going to serve the city for many years to come. So let's really, take a critical eye to some of the ongoing projects. We have the Nairobi Expressway where, the designs are still secret, so we don't know whether it's going to have cycle tracks or walkways. We really think the design should be made public, and, and there would be a lot of benefit from being able to get input from the community to make this project better for the people it's going to serve. Kiambu Road has some walkways on some stretches, but it's basically a highway design, doesn't have safe crossings, doesn't have cycle tracks. So that's something we need to work on. The Upper Hill Flyover project will demolish the NMT facilities that NMS just built on the same corridor on Kenyatta and Valley Road, and reduce the width of them. And then we have other projects like Magadi Road, where it's a only 1.5 meter walkway, no cycle track. Mombasa Malindi Road in Mombasa, this corridor has it has 800 cycles per hour according to counts we did, and there's no cycle track. So we really have a lot of work to do. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Kenha and Kura to play a more active role in promoting NMT. And I think we can work together to start designing streets that really serve the urban residents and not just cars. So thanks a lot, and look forward to more discussion afterward.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that very informative presentation, and congratulations for the good work that you are doing in putting together the street design manual for urban areas. And of course, in Kisumu, Mombasa, I think we've seen some very great examples of how it can be done. And I like the notion that it's possible to put in place the infrastructure without tampering with our trees. So we just need to be creative and innovative. So ladies and gentlemen, as we go on with the presentation, like I mentioned earlier, if you have any question or comment, you can drop that on the chat box and we'll be able to pick it up and then react to it. So, Constant, are you now good to go?
But after Chris's presentation, I don't know whether I'm going to add much. I'll try my best as a Nairobian. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As introduced earlier on, my name is Constant Kapp, an urban planner and researcher, and also a regular commentator on matters to do with urban mobility. And I will start this by sharing these key figures. And I've put them as 40 plus and 36 plus. And those of us who may be familiar with the city of Nairobi or with Kenya will be aware that over 40% of the citizens in the city, actually in the country, use non-motorized transit as a means of as their primary means of mobility, meaning, from the house to work, from school to work, they actually use NMT as their primary means. Now, coincidentally, or rather quite sadly, over 36% of the citizens, of the accidents in the country are to pedestrians. Okay, and we've not yet even counted cyclists, cart pullers, and other people using human-propelled means. So this raises an alarm, obviously, on the necessity that we have for this very critical infrastructure, as Chris has explained earlier on. And I'll just point out 6 key principles of pedestrian planning, which also as a user, as users and not as users and planners, primarily as users, we ask ourselves, before you walk somewhere or you cycle somewhere, is it safe? Okay. Will I be hit by a car? Will I be hit by a PSV? Is it secure? Will I be mugged? Will I, in the case of women, they ask, will they be given, will there be catcalling along the road? Okay. Is the route direct, or do I have to go around? Okay, do I have to follow the route? A lot of our NMT infrastructure, unfortunately, follows the same route as cars. Okay, so you have to go maybe around a certain feature, or maybe even around a park at times, a certain public, because maybe that park is not safe. So the person walking actually has to go a much longer distance. Legibility, in the case where we have pedestrian paths or cycling ways, how easy, actually that could even come with distinguishability. How visibly distinguished is it from the rest of the infrastructure? comfort becomes a very critical point. As a cyclist, I'll tell you, you know, that sometimes we get for places where cabro blocks are used for cycling lanes. And those are not, you know, the bumpy nature of cabro blocks is not safe for cyclists. So you end up with people on bicycles actually using the main carriageway to move, to ride, which is not safe for them. And then, of course, as Chris mentioned earlier, universal access. You know, how accessible is the pedestrian infrastructure for people on wheelchairs, people on crutches, the elderly, and other people who may, children, and other people who may not find it as easy to move around. And you know, traditionally we have a couple of a number of user challenges that I'll just quickly read through. You know, sometimes we have poor NMT linkage with public transport. Okay, you know, accessing maybe the railways bus stop is not as easy. It's much easier just to drive home than to walk all the way, go through the hassle of accessing the railway bus stop, you know, by crossing a busy road like Haile Selassie Road to access public transport. Prioritization of aesthetics. This happens a lot in upper class neighborhoods where, and I'll show you a picture of that. I tried taking of that, where you find people planting flowers along the pedestrian way, almost to keep away pedestrians. Struggles of persons with disability. Okay, this tends to be a big challenge in, as was explained earlier, with regard to universal access. You know, people, you know, how does a person with disability, for instance, in the Nairobi CBD, move from, say, City Hall to Ambassador bus station? Okay, when you think of all the struggles that person has to go through, you already start feeling sorry for the person. Dangers in school zones. Okay, and you know, many times our school zones are supposed to be the safest areas, but at times many people are reluctant to allow their children to walk to school, and those children who walk to school tend to do it because they don't have a choice, because the areas around schools are not that safe. Again, non-segregation of the fifth point, which is non-segregation of infrastructure. You know, do we have clear segregation between where the cyclist is supposed to go, where the motorist is supposed to go, and you know, is there a way in which, you know, the two can't interfere with each other? Flooding and burst sewers, as we experienced on Tuesday, and fortunately I have an image of that. And in line with position number 2, upper class mindsets. Actually, with point number 2, we can also look at the way sometimes even the city itself will give more value to grass along the median than places for people to cross. And here, you know, we have an image of a highway, which is a typical scenario we have in Nairobi. And you can see here that those who have to access public transport have to really, on the left, have to literally just stand along the roadside and create an illegal bus stop. Whereas those who are using non-motorized transit, as you can see in the image on the right, have actually created their own path. Okay, in the median of the road, such paths tend to be created by people walking over time. You know, very busy place with very poor. Actually, you can see no space for any cyclist, and only on the right there's a small attempt towards having some a path for the pedestrian, which we can even see within the circle. Someone has already parked his car there for his own interest. Then we have this, you know, it's a tweet I saw today morning, and someone tagged me in it, you know, that we are protecting aesthetics more than we're protecting people. Okay, at times we find, you know, beautification projects, a lot of effort is put in, but very little effort is thought of how will, you know, people move around the city. I know in this an example, this case now, we also bring another story of the border sector, you know, and their intrusion and invasion of non-motorized transit infrastructure. And this, you know, is a complaint that we get from cyclists, from pedestrians, that, you know, we are walking on a path that belongs to us, and then you have 5, 6, you know, motorcycles just coming through, and there's really not much you can do with that as a user. Okay, and then when it rains, okay, challenges we experience in the rain. You can see the gentleman in the circle there, struggling to find his way across the road. I took this picture on Tuesday in part of Nairobi known as South Sea, where we had a burst sewer and a flooded area due to heavy rains, and yet this place is a link between. There's a large amount of people who walk here from Kibera moving towards parts of industrial area, and yet they are forced to pass through here. Unfortunately, I didn't get an image of a cyclist, but there were about 2 or 3 cyclists who passed through the water on their way to work. PWDs, as I mentioned, this was a very inspiring picture that was shared on social media sometime last year of a policeman trying to help a person with disability at one of the major bus stops, because it was clear that the person was actually struggling, to get to the other side of the road, and the policeman had to go out of his way and help this person. This person, quite inspiring. But the question we ask ourselves is, could we have the infrastructure that the person is able to move around independently without needing help from others? And then here we have the typical path where someone has fenced out a large section of the pedestrian walkway in order to so-called keep people away. Okay, I will not comment much about the quality of the walkway, but already the fact that people are keeping people away, that typical elitist structure, that class structure that sometimes we get into ourselves. And then school zones. Okay, here I got an image in a place called Ngara where a sign of children crossing was actually marked out, not marked out, but kept out of almost invisible by a hedge and a bush that had covered it. And this area has about 6 or 7 schools within it, and school safety in school zones is as far as NMT is a very critical aspect for any city. And then we have cyclists, who struggle in mixed traffic, as had been explained in the earlier presentation. So what do users experience? Okay, we have to recognize the recent attempts, and I think there's been a very intentional attempt by NMS, Nairobi Metropolitan Services, by Kenya Urban Roads Authority towards improvement of this NMT infrastructure. We've seen intentional inclusion of NMT in some recent projects, as was shared in the earlier presentation. We also have what I personally consider, NMT priority zones now. Okay, we have streets like Luthuli Avenue where NMT has been literally put as a priority over the personal car. We have places like Mwindimbingu Street where non-motorized transport infrastructure has been doubled, within the CBD, and this has, linked to point number 3, improve the walkability in the central business district. And you notice how safer it is even as a user to walk along some of these streets. I can share some experience I had, the last 2 weeks. There's some research I've been doing with a couple of young research assistants, and we agreed that we'd be meeting in town at around 6:30 in the morning, and so we had to find a place to meet, and the best place an easy convergence point was Jivanji Gardens. Okay, and we'd meet there at 6:30 in the morning. And reason, of course, it's a public space, but it's also easily linked by good and non-motorized transit infrastructure. So from whatever bus stops they came out of, they found it very comfortable just to walk, along Kenyatta Avenue and Mwindimbingu Street, thanks to the recent infrastructure that the NMS have put. And then, there's also recognition of high volume pedestrian and cycling zones. This we've heard from discussions with people from the city, in their attempts towards putting more NMT infrastructure moving towards neighborhoods. Chris has talked about the urban street design manual. And then, and in point number 6, relating to a bit of positivity with regard to trees, we've seen, at Park Road, an attempt to retain trees and improve NMT infrastructure. Park Road is a very dry kind of area, but they've tried to retain trees as they put better non-motorized transit infrastructure. And this has proved to be popular because those are now convergence zones for people. I recently, I'm currently developing this map, and that's why I've put there work in progress to attempt to show some of the existing cycling infrastructure, which I've put in blue, compared to the highways. And you can see that there has been an attempt towards putting some, cycling infrastructure, but there's still a long way to go. Okay, there's still a long way to go. If you look at, the employment, the employment areas in the low income areas, you can see there's very little linkage as far as cycling infrastructure, say from Kangemi to Westlands, or from Kibera to industrial area. Okay, although we do have very large walking populations there. Okay, fortunately we do have such kind of experiences in Nairobi, but unfortunately at the same time, you can see that the trees are marked X, and as Chris mentioned in his presentation, these trees may actually go very soon. But this is a kind of safe and friendly experience that people like in their city, where you can walk and there's enough space and you can maintain distance, and you're not all fighting for space. Okay, I think this was a similar image was also shared, where people have now safe crossing infrastructure, and I don't think I need to go into too many details about this. We've also seen some very interesting developments at neighborhood level, and this is Ole Sangale Road, an image in 2017 on your right, and an image today. And you can see the raised pedestrian crossing prevents public transport vehicles from or taxi drivers or other drivers from coming onto the pedestrian pathway. Okay, the street also has very nice sloping a slope from the pedestrian pathway to the road at different gates or entrance points, which enables children, people on wheelchairs also to safely move around. And this street has actually proven to be quite almost like a model, of how we can move within improve the infrastructure within some of our neighborhoods. There's a very big university at the end of this street. There's a primary school near the street, and this is literally also a residential area. So this kind of infrastructure ends up being a positive experience even for parents who have to send their children to the shops. They don't need to worry about speeding vehicles. Okay, this was a before and after image of Luthuli Avenue, which I said was given almost a pedestrian priority. And talking to traders in the area, they tell you how the air quality in the area has improved, how there are more people flocking this particular street to visit their businesses. I compare this to a discussion I had 2 weeks ago with someone along Ronald Ngala Street, which is a street basically full of PSVs, and they were complaining and saying, we also want our streets to be like this, such that we can have cleaner air, we can have we can even tell potential business partners or business people to come to our businesses, and they won't struggle to come to their offices. This is a recent development along Mzima Springs Road. This used to be quite a dusty street, but now there are a couple of kilometers of such infrastructure that have been put by NMS recently. Again, this is right outside a school in Lamington area, and a very low dense area, but still very good attempt and effort to towards improving infrastructure. And then we have, I'm sure we've all seen some of these attempts within the CBD, where we've had improved and widened pedestrian paths. I'll just go through them quickly so that we can just have a view, because I've kind of talked about them. These are some of the dangers. A bus moving back towards losing its brakes, and a bit dangerous for pedestrians. What I can say, is that pedestrians are no longer forgotten species, and we continue to see cycling lanes being put, but again, some form of interference. Challenges that exist, again, we have vehicles interfering with what is essentially supposed to be non-motorized transit. We have trees that provide shade for pedestrians being chopped down, making life a bit more difficult. This is a very high pedestrian zone in the evenings. And I'll come back, finish up, my last 3 slides, looking at, some of the pillars we developed recently, which, can be shared later on. They relate to public transport, but also that closely relates to non-motorized transit, availability, accessibility, inclusivity, sustainability, and equity. Very key pillars that are important also for those using non-motorized transit. We've had some attempts at, as users, at, tactical urbanism, where we close streets and give a new experience. This was in Mingu Street a few years ago. Now this place has some is almost 50% a pedestrian street. Those are small attempts that we've made as professionals and users to advocate for better infrastructure. User benefits, I think I've explained this throughout the presentation, and with that, I believe we can move to the next. We can get you understand the user experience of better NMT infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Constant, for that presentation. And I'm sure all of us can identify with the challenges, particularly because at one point or the other, we are users of NMT. And of course, Constant has given us a lot of issues that we experience as a cyclist and of course as pedestrian. But there's hope because something seems to be happening, and we'll get to hear that later on from Martin Eshiwani. Right now, allow me to now introduce Kali Koinange, our next presenter. And Kali has been working in the field of sustainable transport for over 10 years and is currently the global program lead of the UN Environment Share the Road program. She works with countries around the world to prioritize investment in infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians. Prior to UN Environment, she was the program manager for the UN Habitat Sustainable Transport for East African Cities program, working with city officials in Nairobi, Addis, and Kampala to plan for introduction of bus rapid transport system. Before moving to Kenya, Kali worked for Transport for London, supporting the design, implementation, and launch of mayoral priority projects such as the London Cycle Hire Scheme and the London Low Emission Zone. Maybe I need to add that Kali was very instrumental. We worked with Kali very closely in putting together the Nairobi NMT policy. And so she has a very good understanding of what the policy is all about. But today, Kali is going to talk to us this particular forum about why NMT policy is important and NMT best practices from other countries. So Kali, if you can hear me, please proceed with the presentation.
Thanks so much, Henry, for making me sound so amazing. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. So I just want to talk to you a bit really about the case for having a policy and just taking a bit of a step back really. On the screen, you can hopefully see a photo of me when I was 2. So I've been promoting non-motorized transport for a very long time. And the Share the Road program, which I run, is very much about supporting governments and stakeholders all over the world, really. Our priority region is Africa, but we also work in Latin America and Asia, and really about going back to basics and thinking about the majority, which is people who walk and cycle. So we do lots of kind of global advocacy and communication, particularly with the likes of, say, development banks around their policies. And we also develop tools and guidance, and we provide in-country technical assistance. So that's what we did, for example, in the case of Nairobi, working with Kara and the county government on the policy. And so what I want to talk about briefly is, what should policies do and why do they not always deliver? And why are they important and who's got it right? So looking at some case studies. So I want to take us back to basics and think about, what actually is a policy? So it's a deliberate system of principles to guide our decisions and actions to achieve rational outcomes and address specific issues or problems. It's a statement of intent about what's to be done, who's to do it, how it's to be done, and for who. So really, if we follow that definition, then a policy of any kind, including a walking and cycling policy, should provide accountability to the people. It should prioritize and do goal setting. It should set out what the plans are to measure and track. It should very much be based on data and evidence and citizen need. It should find solutions to problems, state intentions, and set out who's responsible for what. What I always say is actually the policy is the first step. It's the beginning, not the end. And sometimes it's actually the easy bit, because the whole point of a policy is actually what happens after that policy is launched, and it's about the policy implementation. So really, once any policy is in place, all of these things, which we call policy tools, should follow. There should be information shared. So for example, this launch today is very much about sharing information, about sharing the public version, a shortened, condensed version of the policy. There should be education, there should be legislation enacted, regulations, guidelines, standards, you know, the list goes on. These are all policy tools. You don't necessarily need all of them, but definitely you should be looking at delivering some of them. And I think that's, you know, where a big challenge is, that quite often there's support. And this is putting my hand up, you know, on our side, we provide support and technical assistance to put the policy in place, but then there is an expectation that the government will do and develop the policy tools. And I think as an international community, we need to do better at thinking about the support that we give and making sure that it's not just at the policy level, but there's also support for developing these policy tools after. So, you know, why is a policy important? So if we go back to this definition and take some of these areas, you know, first of all, it's a deliberate system. So the idea is, if it's deliberate and it's a system, it removes the guesswork on how we're dealing with things, because we've agreed there's a way we want to do it, and it's this system and it's in this policy. The other thing is, it can last, the system lasts, even if politicians change. You can go back to the policy and what's been agreed, even as governments change. And there's also transparency about what the government is setting out as its intentions and beliefs and its values and plans. Then it's also there to guide our decisions and actions. So if you think about what does that mean, if we're saying that this policy is setting out how we're going to make decisions about walking and cycling and our actions, then we should be accountable to that. And if we're being guided, what are we being guided by? We're being guided by data and evidence, and we should be being guided by consultation and participation with citizens. It's there to address specific issues or problems. And to really understand what those issues or problems are, there has to be a process of involving citizens and civil society. And it's almost more important than the policy itself, the process of sitting down with citizens and civil society and NGOs and understanding what the issues are, much like Chris and Constant have shared today. That's important. It's that process. And it's an opportunity to override the norm and rethink, focusing on people, not cars. And then finally, who is to do it and for who? So this policy is important because it gives us clarity on who's responsible for doing what. It encourages cross-agency working, because in the Nairobi policy, it talks about the fact that the government, the city county, are not responsible for all roads in Nairobi. So are the national government agencies, and they have a role too. And then there's accountability to the public, and it can also be used as an advocacy tool, because we can keep going back and reminding our government partners that, hey, this is what you signed up to and this is what you committed. So Henry asked me to talk about case studies and, you know, best practice. And I always think of Lupita when I, you know, picking up her Oscar, and, you know, the winner is for the best walking and cycling infrastructure. But it's actually not as simple as that, because, you know, who could do better? Of course, Kenya can do better. Chris and Constant have given us some really good examples. Ethiopia, Rwanda, Zambia, the UK, USA, everyone can do better in delivering on the policies. But who's doing great? Kenya's also got some fantastic examples. So has Ethiopia and Rwanda and Zambia and the UK and the USA. So there are really good examples in Kenya, in Nairobi, of the policy being implemented. And there are also examples of the policy being ignored. So it's not about saying who's doing better, who's doing worse. It's just about working in partnership to get that consistency of the implementation of the policy. So looking specifically at the issues, money is obviously a big one. The policy does highlight a 20% investment for walking and cycling, but it's There needs to be a balanced investment. It's a good starting point, and we have to take our hat off to Nairobi because we're the only city walking and cycling policy in the whole continent that is actually committed to a percentage figure. But if you've got 50 to 60%, and in some cases 70 to 90% of your population walking, we need to think about, is that enough? And I think it's pretty obvious it's not. So I think it's a good starting point, but there has to be a balanced investment. On design, and you know, some of you, I promise I didn't have a conversation with Chris before this about making our presentations match, but we need consistency. Chris was polite enough to call them pedestrian bridges. I like to call them motor vehicle bridges for the same reason Chris explained, that they're not made for pedestrians, they're made for the convenience of motor vehicles. So whilst we have the design manual and there are examples of it being followed, there are also examples of it being completely ignored. Health, we need trees. So it can't be that the walking and cycling policy and transport policy is just about getting from A to B. We have to think more holistically. By cutting down trees every time we want to build a road or even a sidewalk, it's defeating the purpose of trying to design a healthy city. Institutions, we need champions for a new way, and I'm really glad we have Martin on the call because he is one of our champions, but we need more, because this isn't about just adding sidewalks across highways. It's about thinking in a completely different way and investing in public transport and walking and cycling. And interagency working is also critical. And I think, you know, a large part of the problem is this policy is owned by the county government, but there are lots of other agencies who have to sign up and say, yes, we will also deliver on this policy. Because if it's a road that's classed as a highway, it's outside of the remit of the county. And then for delivery, so accountability and transparency to citizens, citizen engagement and data collection, sharing and use. And then, so I have a few kind of recommendations we could think about for policy delivery. One is setting up a national government NMT unit. We talk about this in the policy, but I think it's worth reminding us that yes, the policy is fine for Nairobi, but we need consistency at a national level, and that might help. And setting up working groups that are interagency and include civil society. Having open data on budgets, designs, projects, so that civil society and citizens can comment and give ideas. Having in place a walking and cycling master plan and how we're going to deliver on that, and freeing up revenue from parking for investment in walking and cycling. I also think we could consider legislation on controlled use of pedestrian bridges, and legislation that says organisations, governments, contractors have to follow the design manual. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kali, for being very concise and for the presentation. I think Kali has shared with us very useful information about why you need a policy, and of course, best practices from other countries that have done quite some good work in that regard. So if we have any comments or reaction to the what we had in terms of presentation, please share that on the chat box. But without wasting time, allow me now to get to Martin Eshiwani to just talk to us about what is happening in the city as far as NMT is concerned. What has been done, what is being planned, and how are we getting involved in terms of various stakeholders. So Martin Eshiwani is the Director of Roads and Transport at NMS, and his duties include road and rail transport policy review, representing the Ministry of Transport, the board of the National Transport Safety Authority. The Commercial Motorcycle Task Force recently constituted develops a framework of improving operation of motorcycles in Kenya, and he was a member of the National Climate Change Action Plan Task Force, among others. So Martin agreed to share with us what the NMS is doing, particularly as regards the NMT, and of course, we should be able to engage him after his presentation. So Pauline was to help Martin with projecting the presentation. So Pauline, maybe you can put on the screen. And Martin, please welcome and proceed with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Henry. Happy to be with you this afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. I'll be very brief because a number of issues have already been raised. And therefore, as you have been told, I am Martin Eshiwani, officially Director Road and Rail Transport at the Ministry, but currently deployed at NMS for a period of 2 years. Then I go back to my place. So I'm happy to, next, I'm happy to have this chance to share with you what we are doing. So I have only 4 slides, which are very brief, but I believe at the end of it, we are going to have a picture of what we are doing. First, I'll look at the policy, but now it has been talked so much, we have heard so much about it, and therefore the focus will be on NMS and implementation status of NMTs in the city of Nairobi. Next. Nairobi NMT policy, as we have heard from the people who are directly involved, it was actually developed within the partnership of those 2 organizations, UNEP and Nairobi City County Government, but also as required by the Constitution, there was a wider consultation of government ministries, NGOs, civil society, and the public for acceptance by various users. On the same slide, if you look at on your right, you see a photograph of Mbingu Street, which was also mentioned in earlier presentation. This one actually reduced the vehicle spaces and increased the walking areas for pedestrians and cyclists. I note that there are concerns about the finishing surface of cyclists. We are aware of that. But what we have decided is that, okay, for those around Nairobi, that is the system that will be used. Then in the second phase, where we are connecting this to the rest of residential areas and other places, we are going to use a different surface and paint it that same color. Next. As we talk about NMT policy, it is important that for us in Nairobi, with a population of 2.32 million trips a day made by walking and cycling, that constitutes 48.2%. That means that out of that 48.2%, 1% are cyclists and 47.2 are pedestrians. At the same time, we have 51% who make their trips by motorized transport. Of course, that 51% can further be broken to those who use public transport system and also those who come by company vehicles and personal cars. NMT is very crucial, particularly when we talk about road safety. For us to understand it further, we know that statistics from NTSA indicate that pedestrians and cyclists, who are the most vulnerable road users, actually form about 41% of road traffic fatalities in Kenya, and these figures in Nairobi are even higher. We have a study carried out in 2018, which gave us a figure of about between 60 and 70% of fatalities in Nairobi are actually pedestrians and cyclists. That means that we therefore find it very necessary to address this aspect of NMT. So therefore, of course, there is need for a well-designed NMT which improves safety. And during this period of COVID, definitely you will agree with me that for social distancing, it is necessary to have more spaces for walking and cycling. Next. Now, when we look at resource allocation, as it was pointed out earlier, the case is that while NMT users constitute about 50% of road users in Nairobi, resources allocated for development of NMT infrastructure is minimal. And we are hoping that this policy, which was adopted by Assembly in 2015, if followed, will actually contribute towards changing our attitude and thinking. And therefore, the policy that we are launching the popular version today, together with the Nairobi Mobility Plan, provide a framework of developing NMTs that is networked, linked, and harmonized with other modes of transport, e.g. railway station. For example, on your right, the photograph there was taken, I took this one on Wednesday this week, where we are developing that movement towards the railway station. And I'm sure that all of you are aware about the changes being made that affect public transport. We have received some concerns about reorganization of transport in Nairobi. But what should be understood about the railway station is that we want vehicles that go to railway station have only one major purpose: to drop people who are going to use a train or to pick guests who have arrived by train. Just remember, bear in mind that we are soon developing a linkage between the railway station and Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. So it means that the usage of that station will definitely increase, but the state in which the stage or the terminus is there doesn't actually provide a good environment to so many people who are using the train. So in our plans, we want to improve and make that environment look better for travelers, main commuters, and people who are going to use a plane. In addition to that, we are also extending NMT infrastructure to public transport facilities, the bus terminals that we are building. For example, at Green Park, we want to develop a very suitable facility such that as you near the place, you will actually be walking in a pedestrian walkway that is covered. You cannot be rained on, or if it is very hot, then you are actually under a cover. And therefore, it will be more convenient as you walk towards the lounge, because the facility will also have a lounge, which means that if you meet a friend, for example, it is possible to have a cup of tea, coffee, as you chat before you take your bus to the residential places. In addition to that, if I may digress a bit and talk about the facility, it will also have a family section whereby mothers with small children can actually change the children or breastfeed them in a particular place designed for them. And in addition to that, the place will also have a dispensary with examination place, consultation, a clinic that can offer basics, and also a supermarket. So now we have heard from Chris that we have a street design manual for urban areas, which was developed together with the ministry. And this will definitely go a long way in helping us actually try to improve what is available based on the standards that are acceptable by many users. So Chris, don't worry, we are concerned, we know, but note that for many years we have not been having this document. But in addition to that, also, it's also important to know, I was sharing discussions with one of my friends, a stakeholder in transport, and was telling me that actually as he went through the engineering course at the University of Nairobi, at no time did they ever cover urban street design. That means that most of the engineers who are now in critical positions did not go through the system, and therefore the thinking may be focused on designing highways and rural roads. Next. So now we can also briefly look at implementation status, whereby we are saying that Nairobi City County Government commenced implementation of the policy, identified the roads for pedestrianization, and improved the walkways. But come March 2020, these services were transferred, which includes roads. 4 key services were transferred from the county government to the national government. That included the roads and therefore led to formation of Nairobi Metropolitan Services. So NMS has actually given priority to improvement of informal settlements in Nairobi through, for example, what you are seeing on your right is a map of Mukurus. There is Mukuru Viwandani, Mukuru kwa Ruben, Mukuru kwa Njenga. With this particular Mukuru, as we plan to improve infrastructure in this particular area, NMT particularly, and roads to be able to access even in the event of emergency, and health services, we have planned for road, for example, to create a total of 52 kilometers of roads within Mukuru alone. That is a network that will improve mobility within the place. So much of it has also NMTs, which will make mobility a big plus for the residents of that particular place. But also apart from NMT, of course, we have provided a number of boreholes and health facilities to improve the area. But in addition to that, as we look at transportation in general, we are also constructing a halt for railway so that the people of Mukuru can also be served by commuter rail services, particularly the normal railway trains that are operating in the city. Next. So NMS so far, as I speak, has done a total of 7.5 kilometers of NMTs this year. And in this financial year now, which we are in, of course, part of resources have already been used. Our target is to make it reach 30 kilometers. That 30 kilometers will create linkages between public transport facilities, residential areas, CBD, industrial area, so that we have NMT that is connected. These places to have NMT connectivity so that the missing link that may have been mentioned by the earlier presenter, we address that gap so that it is possible to move from a particular residential area to your working area through NMT that is well linked. In addition to that, we heard about pedestrianization of Nairobi Avenue. We saw the picture, but we have also planned to include Banda Street and Mfangano streets in Nairobi for pedestrianization. This will increase the flow or the movement of people in these corridors. Others will follow, but for this particular financial year, this is what we are looking at. We also want to organize how to channel pedestrians to improve safety. A number of activities will be done towards that end. When you look at, for example, the map on the picture, the photo taken along Kenyatta Avenue on your right, those are vehicle spaces that have been done away with so that we increase walking spaces, as I mentioned earlier on. So ladies and gentlemen, we are doing quite a lot. Of course, we have other challenges, but we are moving. Next. So this is just additional photographs. Of course, that Kenyatta Avenue, we have seen it. And Mwindu Bingu, we had also seen it. This is NMT along Park Road. As it was mentioned by Constance, NMS has not cut any trees in the city in the development of this infrastructure. We are also working on other corridors. For example, from City Square Post Office to the railway bridge, a footbridge that crosses over to Workshop Road. We have already finalized. Kenya Railways has also redone the bridge afresh, which is actually being finalized, but maybe by the end of this week, or if not, then by early next week, we should be through. And we are developing, we are working on pedestrian walkway and cycling lane so that it is linked. There is a point which was raised by Chris sometimes back about how to roll over a bicycle on the bridge. That one, we have taken it up with Kenya Railways and it's being addressed. So ladies and gentlemen, there are a number of issues we are doing. And of course, we also have a lot of challenges. Some of them may not be mentioned here. But one area that I wanted also to mention is that together with the UN Habitat, we are looking at how to improve NMT along Nairobi River from Globe Cinema towards Resco's Roundabout and eventually to Kamukunji. Around that place, we have Grogan Road, and with Grogan Road being there, we are working on it so that in the next few weeks, it should be ready for use. But next to Grogan Road is actually a place you will find so many mechanics. And we have had discussions with them, identified together with them possible areas where we can relocate them. We had 5 sites. We took them to all the 5 sites and then they chose one. So the site they chose will actually be used to relocate mechanics and small traders. Small traders are people, the ones with M-Pesa services, those spare part outlets will be moved together with them because they have a symbiotic relationship between them. That therefore, with their relocation to a new site, will leave a place for development of NMT. And therefore we want to develop NMT along that corridor up to Kamukunji. So those are some of the initiatives we want to do and many more that we are working on. We are hoping to do so within this 1 year and 3 months remaining before we pack and go to our various offices where we came from and hand over to the county or Nairobi County government. Next. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of my presentation, which was very brief. And as you can see there, I just welcome you to work with us to make the green city in the sun great, 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 great. Let us make Nairobi great. It is possible. I know we are working, some of the issues we are addressing are urgently being done without adequate consultations with the relevant stakeholders. Some of them, it is the pressure we have to deliver within a specified period of time. But where time allows, I've seen a number of occasions when I've shared a proposed design and somebody brings a new idea. And then actually when I share that idea with the designers, they actually accept it and appreciate it. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for hearing from me as we prepare to improve the city of Nairobi. So with that in mind, we can now say that, let us say the popular version of Nairobi NMT policy is now officially launched and available for use by various stakeholders. We shall work together to improve the city of Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that. And you've actually gone ahead to officially launch the popular version, which is good. We'll just share a few images or slides about the popular version. But I think you've given us some good information about what is going on, what is in plan, and how you are just looking at upscaling the whole issue about NMT and the infrastructure. I've looked at the chat box and there's some very good conversations going on there, questions and people responding. And I'm happy that most of the questions that have been asked are actually being responded to by either the panelists or other participants. So we will not have to take much time on the plenary in terms of questions and the responses. But just, Martin, something that I've seen, which I think perhaps you need to respond to, is there's a concern that shouldn't we have an NMT network that moves people away from cars wherever possible? And essentially what is coming out is it possible, or is there a need to, for instance, have a master plan specifically on NMT so that all these things we are doing are heading towards a particular direction, and we can be able to have an idea where we are going to and how it will all look like at the end of it all. So the question, and I think the issue is there some kind of a very integrated, elaborate plan to guide all these activities that are taking place as regards NMT in Nairobi? So maybe Martin can be able to just give us a response on that.
Okay, I'll respond to that in this way. When NMS was being launched by His Excellency the President, one of the things he stated was that NMS is to implement Nairobi Urban Mobility Plan, and that Nairobi Mobility Plan brings together all modes of transport and how they are connected and integrated. So you are aware about the efforts being made by Namata towards BRT. You are also aware about the launch of commuter rail and extension being done to Jomo Kenyatta Airport and other places, and opening a number of halts where people will be able to access improved railway services as a way of commuting to town. But all these places, as I said in my presentation, are linked by NMT. So our thinking is that we link them the way it has been described in the NMT. By the way, we have NMT master plan and the Nairobi Urban Mobility Plan. So we have all this that we are working on as a government, but being implemented by different agencies. So we are working towards that direction.
Very good, and thank you for that, Martin. Chris, somebody asked if the manual that you're working on will be implemented at the national level or just in Nairobi. Maybe a quick response on that, Chris.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the idea, this is a national manual. It's being developed by the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Urban Development, and Public Works, MOTI-HUD PW. And so it'll be adopted at the national level. And the idea is to serve as a guide for all the agencies. So the, Kenha, Kura, Kara, and also county governments, so that all these agencies that are in the, plus NMS, right? All the agencies that are in the process of building streets and maintaining streets can make reference to it.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. I've seen a number of comments, a number of questions that have been responded to, but I think let me just take one by Manu Chandari. I don't know if he's still on board. And he was saying that the acceptance that the workers have right to have good road to walk. It needs the political support and organizations who will drive the change. Kara has not got the strength, and I agree with you, Manu, because Kara alone cannot be able to push this. We need to have concerted effort. We need to have everybody involved so that we are pulling the same direction. But definitely, we must be able to recognize that workers or NMT users have the right to have good roads and good facilities to enable them move from one point to another. So, ladies and gentlemen, because time has also gone so much, I want to invite you to maybe have a look at the chat box if you haven't and see some of the questions that have been raised there and the responses that we've received. And if you still have clarification to be made, please feel free to get in touch through email. You can send email to the panelists or to us, and then we can be able to get a response to you so that we are able to tackle as many issues as possible. So with that, I want you to allow me to invite Jackie Klopp, who has been a great partner on this journey on not just NMT, but many other issues that have a positive impact to the society. So Jackie will just make a brief summary remarks about what we've been talking about and have views on a number of issues that have been touched on. And then we can be able to go to the next level of closing. So maybe I can just introduce Jackie briefly so that for those of you who are seeing her for the first time. She's a co-director of the Center for Sustainable Urban Development and a research scholar who explores the intersection of sustainable transport, land use, accountability, air pollution, climate change, and data and technology. She is the author of numerous academic and popular articles on land and the politics of infrastructure with a focus on Africa. She's increasingly exploring the potential of new technologies to impact transportation and land use in the 21st century and has been experimenting with creative urban mapping projects for both analysis and advocacy. Dr. Klopp is a founding member of the award-winning Digital Matatus Consortium, which has produced the first open transit data and public transit map for Nairobi's quasi-formal minibus, that is Matatu, transit system. She also helped found Digital Cairo, a consortium of Transport for Cairo, Takwin Integrated Community Development and Digital Matatus to create open transport data for Cairo. She's currently writing a book on the politics of planning in Nairobi. Dr. Klopp has a BA from Harvard University where she studied physics, and her PhD in political science is from McGill University. Prior to joining CSUD, she was an assistant professor of International and Public Affairs at the School of International and Public Affairs and director of the Economic and Political Development Concentration, where she taught the politics of international development and oversaw student workshops across the globe. Dr. Klopp has worked as a consultant for the World Bank, the United Nations, World Resource Institute. She's currently teaches in the Sustainable Development Undergraduate Program at Columbia University. So Jackie has done quite a bit of work on the issue I talked about, and maybe she can share with us her thoughts briefly on what we've been discussing for the last 1.5 hours. So Jackie, please proceed.
Thank you so much, Henry. It's really a pleasure to be here and to listen to the really important discussion. And I want to thank everyone who presented and also who gave such excellent comments and questions. And a special thanks to our friend, ally, Martin Eshawani, for being here, taking the time and really sharing with us the efforts that they're trying to make in the government to shift something that really needs to shift desperately. We know that road safety is taking many Kenyan lives. We know that the way the roads are designed in our cities, cities in Kenya, but also elsewhere, can often be terrifying. In the policy, to popular policy version, we have the voice of a small schoolgirl talking about how terrifying it is to just go to school. We know that air pollution is taking the lives of many Kenyans. Recent report suggests about 5,000 people die a year. and that transport and the way, again, our cities are designed for cars is a huge contribution to that. We know respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular illnesses, and increasingly even obesity, because people are not able to walk and be active in their cities, is a problem. And then we have talked about this series in the context of climate change. Currently, the situation is very sobering. The UN came out with a new report suggesting we are no way on track in terms of keeping our global temperatures down. And while Africa has not contributed to this in a substantial way, Africa and cities like Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa will be huge victims of this climate crisis in terms of extreme heat, flooding, for example, sea level rise. In fact, they're already victims. These things are already happening. And Kenya is a global leader in climate change. It has a very strong national action policy. And I think one thing that needs to come together now is that all these different groups working on whether it's road safety, public health, air pollution, climate, and transport need to come together and really push to transform the city streets in Kenya and make this infrastructure really for the 21st century. And that means a lot more investment, like Carly was saying, into walking paths, public transport, cycling lanes. We didn't talk about freight, but non-motorized freight, something you're seeing increasingly in cities where, you have bicycle couriers or electric vehicle couriers, or for that last mile, so you don't have trucks polluting in neighborhoods. So I think we know what we have to do. We really need to move the resources into a better kind of city with, that puts people at the center and helps us address our climate crisis. It's a challenge for every city and every place across the globe, but I think Kenya has an opportunity to continue to be a leader and to make sure that its cities reflect that leadership on climate. And I think, Martin, you can see from the people here that there are a lot of citizens and civil society and think tanks and university folks who are behind the government doing the right thing in transforming the city streets. So, and as part of that, it's really my pleasure to be, part of launching a popular version of the NMT policy, which we hope will help citizens be galvanized and government be galvanized to address, this critical transformation that needs to happen. So with that, I am really pleased to have us launch this. Well, Martin has already wonderfully launched this, but to release the popular version. And I would like to say we're going to continue this conversation in a second discussion in the new year. So thank you to everyone, and also the Columbia Global Center. And I also want to recognize my some of the students at Columbia at SEPA who helped design and think about the popular version, who are also here. So thanks to you as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Henry.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for sharing with us those insights. And as always, we are proud to work with you on this kind of initiatives. So ladies and gentlemen, I want us to do the last item, last activity, just to launch the popular version. I don't know if Pauline, you can just screen it, maybe the cover page of the popular version, and also the link for the same. As we do that, let me just tell you briefly about what this journey has been like. So as you all know, we had the national Nairobi NMT policy developed some years back to just guide the whole process of developing putting in place NMT infrastructure. So we thought that perhaps for us to be able to have more awareness about the policy, we need to have a document that can be easy to read and easy to relate with. So the popular version of the Nairobi NMT policy is an initiative of CARA, Center for Sustainable Development of Columbia University, and the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia University. A team from SIPA, and we had 3 very energetic SIPA students engaged in this process, Gina McGill, Fumiko Sasaki, and Fernando Mura, who took that time to go through the NMT policy and simplify the key provisions in a manner that can easily be understood by various road users. We appreciate the input, of course, of our partner, Jackie Klopp, and also Constant Cap, who is in this panel, who reviewed the draft popular version and ensured that it properly captures the key issues and is reader-friendly. The objective of this particular version is to create awareness about the policy to ensure that various stakeholders and the public in general understand the benefits of its implementation, what is expected of them, and the government as far as implementation of the policy is concerned. We also expect that there will be more active engagement of political leadership at all levels to get their support for the implementation of the policy. So we, as CARA, and of course, as other partners involved in this process, we commit to disseminate this document as much as we can so that we can get as many people as possible having to know or having to understand what the policy is all about, and of course, providing support in whichever way they can in their respective stations. So on your screen, you can see that's the cover page of the policy. It touches on a number of areas that is contained on the main policy, and just try to simplify them. I don't know if, Pauline, you can just scroll a bit so that you can see a bit of what is inside in pictorial form and in a language that is easily understood, and so that people can appreciate what the policy is about, and they can be able to provide whatever kind of support they need to provide. We have a link for the popular version that opens into CARA website. If you visit our website, you'll be able to see it. And I'm sure Jackie and CGC will also put it on their website. And all of you are free to share this with your respective networks as much as possible, so that we have more people getting aware about the popular version. So I think with that kind of background, we want to say that this document is now available for the public. And Bwana Eshiwani had actually touched on that. But Eshiwani, if you're still on board, could you maybe now at this point just declare the popular version officially launched? Okay, we seem not to get Eshiwani online. So, but ladies and gentlemen, if you can't get Eshiwani, so we wanted just to share with you what the work that has been done in putting together this popular version, and invite you to access it. We are happy to share it on email. We are happy to share it even through your WhatsApp platform, and encourage you to share it out with your networks. So the document is launched, and we'll be sharing it in due course. So having said that, ladies and gentlemen, we have had presentations from various panelists. And I want each panelist just to take 1 minute just to give a closing remark based on what we've discussed, and of course share with us their thoughts on perhaps how they think we should be able to move this conversation forward. So I want to ask Constant just to take 1 minute to give some closing remarks.
I'll just ask, those, first of all, thank you all for this launch, and ask us as much as possible, from the attendants, those of us who are in civil society, private sector to keep pushing for this agenda. The more we push, the more they listen. I know it takes time, as has been said, but we're slowly seeing inroads being made. We've been in this discussion. I found people already in it when I came in, and it's taken time. But when we start seeing, the kind of images we are seeing, we've now heard of Mfangano Street, a place that anyone who goes to bus station knows has high pedestrian numbers. When we start talking about places like Mukuru, then we're moving in a positive direction. So let's keep up the struggle, and we keep working towards having a better city.
Thank you very much, Constant. Chris?
Sure. Yeah, so it's great to see some of the proposals, especially what Martin talked about, a lot of these pedestrian improvements. But I think we really need to tackle the dissonance that's there in Nairobi. Because at the same time that NMS is trying to take forward these really positive projects, the major investments in the city are still car-centric, right? We're expanding the roads for cars. We're spending money on BRT, on flyovers that don't incorporate BRT. And it's really moving in a direction that's contrary to all the good things that Martin has talked about. So I think we really have to address this contradiction in the way that we're developing, and we can't just have this all of the above strategy where we can build some flyovers and some NMT and hope that it all works out. Like we really have to choose the direction that we want for the city, and make sure that all these projects are consistent with the policies that Kenya has adopted. Kenya has a very progressive climate change action plan. It calls for improving public transport, improving NMT, introducing low emissions vehicles. We need to start putting those things into practice, and we need to make sure that we bring on board the road agencies, Kenha and Kura. Those are our key partners for developing a sustainable mobility system in the city. And we need to make sure that there's the political will to do it. So thanks again for having us. It's been a good discussion, and we definitely need to keep it going.
Thank you very much, Chris. So ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been a good session. We've interacted, we've learned a lot, and I want to thank all of you for being with us up to this particular moment. Maybe I just want to ask Murugi if she's still with us. She's hosting us for this particular forum, just to tell us bye and confirm if we didn't misbehave in our house.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you very much to all the panelists and also to all of the attendees of this event. This has really been an eye-opening event for me. I grew up in Nairobi, so I know Nairobi very well. And these issues have always been of concern to me, and to see that they are being addressed at the very different levels that we have here really gives me a lot of hope for the future. What I would like to say is for the people attending, please look out for the next chapter to this discussion. We'll be talking on a different topic, but still related. And also look out for other events around healthy cities that we are going to be hosting from CGC Nairobi. So we are delighted that you are here to join us today. And we ask you to, keep in touch with us and let us work together on solving these issues that really are of great, great importance. So thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you, Murugi. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great discussion. And let's continue the conversation and continue pushing for the right things to be done. Asanteni sana, and you are free to log out. Thank you.